Just Blaze was one of the house producers at Rockefeller Records, the company I co founded with Kareem Burke and Dame Dash. He's a remarkable producer, one of the best of his generation. As much as anyone, he helped craft the Rockefeller sound when the label was at its peak. Manipulated soul samples and original drum tracks, punctuated by horn stabs or big organ chords. It was dramatic music. It had emotion and nostalgia and a street edge. But he combined those elements into something original. His best tracks were stories in themselves. With his genius for creating drama and story in music, it made sense that Just was also deep into video games. He'd written round tracks for them. He played them, he collected them. He was even a character in one of them. If he could have gotten bodily sucked into a video game like the guy in Tron did, he would have been happy forever. I was recording the Black album and wanted Just to give me one last song for the album, which was supposed to be my last, but he was distracted by his video game work. He'd already given me one song, December 4th, for the album, but I was still looking for one more. He was coming up empty, and we were running up against our deadlines for getting the album done and mastered. At the same time, the promotion was already starting, which isn't my favorite part of the process. I'm still a guarded person when I'm not in the booth or on stage with my oldest friends, and I'm particularly wary of the media. Part of the pre release promotion for the album was a listening session in the studio with a reporter from the Village Voice, a young writer named Elizabeth Mendez Berry. I was playing the album unfinished. I felt like it needed maybe two more songs to be complete. After we listened to the album, the reporter came up to me and said the strangest thing. You don't feel funny? I was like, huh? Because I knew she meant funny as in weird. And I was thinking, actually, I feel real comfortable. This is one of the best albums of my career. But then she said it again. You don't feel funny? You're wearing that Che t-shirt and you have. She gestured dramatically at the chain around my neck. I couldn't even concentrate on the music, she said. All I could think of was that big chain bouncing off of Che's forehead. The chain was a Jesus piece, the Jesus piece that Biggie used to wear. In fact, it's part of my ritual when I record an album. I wear the Jesus piece and let my hair grow till I'm done. This wasn't the first time I'd worn a Che t-shirt. I'd worn a different one during my taping of an MTV Unplugged show, which I'd taped with the Roots. I didn't really think much of it. Her question, don't you feel funny, caught me off guard, and I didn't have an answer for her. The conversation moved on, but before she left, she gave me a copy of an essay she wrote about me for a book about classic albums. The essay was about three of my albums: Reasonable Doubt, Volume 3, Life and Times of S. Carter, and The Blueprint. That night I went home and read it. Here are some highlights. On Dope Man, he calls himself the soul of Mumia in this modern day time. I don't think so. And JayZ is convincing when he raps, I'm representing for the seat where Rosa Parks sat, where Malcolm X was shot, where Martin Luther was popped on the ruler's back. You almost believe him. And referring to my MTV Unplugged show, when he rocks his Guvera shirt and a do-rag, squint and you see a revolutionary. But open your eyes to the platinum chain around his neck. JayZ is a hustler. Wow, I could have just dismissed her as a hater. I remember her going on about bling bling, which was just too easy. And honestly, even after reading her essays, I was mostly thinking, it's a t shirt, you're bugging. But I was fascinated by the piece and thought some more about what she was saying. It stuck with me, and that night I turned it around in my head. We rebellious, we back home. One of Big's genius lines wasn't even a rhyme. It was in the ad lib to Juicy, his first big hit. Yeah, this album is dedicated to all of the teachers that told me I'd never amount to nothing. To all the people that lived above the buildings that I was hustling in front of, that called the police on me when I was just trying to make some money to feed my daughter, and all the niggas in the struggle. I love that he described what a lot of hustlers were going through in the streets, dissed and feared by teachers and parents and neighbors and cops, broke, working a corner to try to get some bread for basic shit, as more than some glamorous alternative to having a real job. He elevated it to the struggle. That's a loaded term. It's usually used to talk about civil rights or black power. the seat where Rosa Parks sat, where Malcolm X was shot, where Martin Luther was popped. Not the kind of nickel and dime just to get by struggle that Biggie was talking about. Our struggle wasn't organized or even coherent. There were no leaders of this movement. There wasn't even a list of demands. Our struggle was truly a something out of nothing, do or die situation. The fucked up thing was that it led some of us to sell drugs on our own blocks and get caught up in the material spoils of that life. It was definitely different, less easily defined, less pure, and harder to celebrate than a simple call for revolution. But in their way, Biggie's words made an even more desperate case for some kind of change. Shay was coming from the perspective, we deserve these rights, we are ready to lead. We were coming from the perspective, we need some kind of opportunity, we are ready to die. The connections between the two kinds of struggles weren't necessarily clear to me yet, but they were on my mind. The Renegade, You've Been Afraid. The day after the listening session, Just finally played a track for me. It opened with some dark minor organ notes and then flooded them with brassy chords that felt like the end of the world. It was beautiful. When a track is right, I feel like it's mine from the second I hear it. I own it. This was the record I'd been waiting for. I spit two quick verses on it. No hook, no chorus, just two verses. Because we were running out of time to get the album done and mastered and released on schedule. I called it Public Service Announcement. The subject of the first verse wasn't blazingly unique. It's a variation on a story I've been telling since I was 10 years old, rapping into a tape recorder. I'm dope, doper than you. But even when a rapper is just rapping about how dope he is, there's something a little bit deeper going on. It's like a sonnet, believe it or not. Sonnets have a set structure, but also a limited subject matter. They are mostly about love. Taking on such a familiar subject and writing about it in a set structure forced sonnet writers to find every nook and cranny in the subject and challenge them to invent new language for saying old things. It's the same with braggadocio and rap. When we take the most familiar subject in the history of rap, why I'm dope, and frame it within the 16 bar structure of a rap verse, synced to the specific rhythm and feel of the track. More than anything, it's a test of creativity and wit. It's like a metaphor for itself. If you can say how dope you are in a completely original, clever, powerful way, the rhyme itself becomes proof of the boast's truth. And there are always deeper layers of meaning buried in the simplest verses. I call rhymes like the first verse on Public Service Announcement Easter egg hunts, because if you just listen to it once without paying attention, you'll brush past some lines that can offer more meaning and resonance every time you listen to them. The second verse for Public Service Announcement was almost entirely unrelated to the first verse. I wrote the second verse, which opens with the lyric, I'm like Che Guevara with bling on, I'm complex, as a response to the journalist. When someone asked me at the time of the Unplugged show why it was that I wore the Che t-shirt, I think I said something glib like, I consider myself a revolutionary because I'm a self-made millionaire in a racist society. But it was really that it just felt right to me. I knew that people would have questions. Some people in the hip hop world were surprised by it. There are rappers like Public Enemy and Dead Prez who've always been explicitly revolutionary, but I wasn't one of them. I also wasn't a Marxist like Shay. The Platinum Jesus piece made that pretty clear. Later, I would read more about Guevara and discover similarities in our lives. I related to him as a kid who had asthma and played sports. I related to the power of his image, too. The image on the t shirt had a name, Guerrillero Heroico, Heroic Guerrilla. The photo was taken after the Cuban Revolution, and by the time I wore the t shirt, it was probably one of the most famous photographs in the world. Like a lot of people who stumble across the image with no context, I was still struck by its power and charisma. The journalist was right, though. Images aren't everything, and a t shirt doesn't change who you are. Like I said in the song Blueprint 2, because the nigga wear kufi, it don't mean that he bright. For an image or symbol or creative act to mean something, it has to touch something deeper, connect to something true. I know that the spirit of struggle and insurgency was woven into the lives of people I grew up with in Bed-Stuy, even if in sometimes fucked up and corrupted ways. JayZ's failures were bloody and his contradictions frustrating. But to have contradictions, especially when you're fighting for your life, is human. And to wear the Che t and to wear the Che shirt and the platinum and diamonds together is honest. In the end, I wore it because I meant it. When Big Daddy Kane's first album, Long Live the Kane, came out in 1988, I was still in the streets. I basically accepted that I'd be a hustler who happened to rap in his spare time. I thought the rap game was crooked and a little fake back then, but I admired people like Kane for making it work. Kane was playing a role, hip hop's first playboy. He had a silk he had the silk robes and pretty girls in all of his videos, all that. But his flow was sick, 'cause I get ill and kill at will, teaching the skill. That's real. You're no thrill, so just stand still and chill as I build. He was condensing, stacking rhymes, one on top of another. Trying to keep up with him was an exercise in breath control, in wordplay, in speed and imagination. He was relentless on the mic. I went on the road with Kane for a while. He knew me from that mixtape I was on with him and JayZ. I think he was considering starting his own label and might have had me in mind for a slot. I'm not sure, and nothing like that ever materialized. But I got an invaluable education watching him perform. Kane was like a hip hop James Brown when it came to his live show. He had a bag of tricks for creating momentum. Where to put in his hits, where to pull back. He would have his DJ, Mr. C, cut off his big hit, Ain't No Half Steppin', after one verse, and before the crowd could relax, he'd throw on something even hotter and dial up the energy even more. Kane would hit the stage with a gold rope and a double breasted silk suit with no shirt, and the girls would go crazy. Scoop and Scrap, his dancers, would do choreographed moves that Kane would step in and out of, but the rhyming was always forceful and nimble, so the guys in the audience would get their minds blown by Kane's mic skills and ignore the ladies' man routines. He just had an incredible amount of showmanship. Even today, I use some of the ideas I picked up back then about pacing and performance in my own live show. He was generous too. He'd stop the show and bring me out when nobody knew who the hell I was. C would put on a breakbeat, Spread Love by Take Six, and I just go in on it in the breakneck double and triple time rhyming that me and JayZ thought we'd pioneered. The crowd would go nuts. Kane put me on a song on his Daddy's Home album in the early 90s. The video for the song was pretty low budget, which worked out okay because all the director could afford to do was something that looked real. They ran the cameras in the middle of the projects and filmed a bunch of hungry New York MCs spitting in a cipher surrounded by a crowd. It was me, Scoob Lover, my man Source Money from Marcy, Old Dirty Bastard, fresh off Wu Tang's debut album, Into the Wu Tang, 36 Chambers, and a kid named Shaheem, a 16-year-old baby-faced kid who was down with the Wu. Shaheem was almost a decade younger than me, but was already making some moves in the business. On Show and Prove, he was rapping with grown men, including some veterans and future legends. In the video, he waded through a grimy crowd, arms dicing up in the air, oversized fitted to the side, stalking the concrete circle like he owned it. He looked even younger than he was, but he had a voice that sounded like it had been through something in Shaolin. I knew kids like that in Marcy. Maybe I'd been one. Wasn't born hustlers. I was birthing them. In the game, there's always a younger guy who has an old soul and an understanding of things beyond his years. I mean, in the street game, but it also applies to the music industry. An older guy will see a kid and think, man, that kid moves differently from the rest. He's ready for this life. They know that if they find the right kid, they can put him under their tutelage and he'll get it fast, step right into the rhythm of the life. But it starts by the other guy watching him, trying to pick up clues. If that sounds predatory, It's because recruiting new workers is one of the most predatory aspects of the game. When you're doing it, it's hard to see it that way because everyone comes into the game as a recruit, including the ones who eventually become recruiters. And most of the older guys doing the recruiting are barely out of their teens themselves, so they still know what it feels like to want to be put on. When I wrote a song for my first album inspired by the tension between older guys and new recruits in the streets, I called Kane and told him, "Man, I wrote this song and I really want Shaheem on it." We tracked down Shaheem's people, and in the end, they said he couldn't do it for whatever reason. And at this point, I hadn't even made an album yet, so they weren't feeling pressed to let him do the song. But even though Shaheem is the one I was thinking about for the record, it didn't really matter that he said no. It was still a record I felt like I needed to make. I just needed someone who could represent what I thought I saw in Shaheem. The next day, I saw this kid I knew walking across Marcy. He looked like a little star already. The swagger in his bop, the clean gear. I knew his older brother, Andre, a little better, but Andre was a kid to me, too. I had this verse that needed a younger voice on it, but a young voice that was rough and full of ambition. And I just got a feeling from this kid. His name was Malik, but he soon renamed himself Memphis Bleek. I didn't just give him the verse, which I'd already composed. After all, I had no idea if he could pull it off. First, there was a test. I collared him and said, "Look, I'm making an album, and if you can be on it, and you can be on it, but you have to learn this song in 24 hours. You don't learn it, then you're not on it." He took the paper I handed to him and looked it over. I'd written the verse down for him in some chicken scratch. And when he held it up, I could tell he was thinking, "Shit, I can't hardly read this." But he took it and went home. He came to my apartment the next day and spit the whole thing like he'd been doing it his whole life. That same day, we went over to the producer Clark Kent's house, where Clark had a basement studio. When we got there, I ordered food for everyone. I asked Bleek what he wanted, and he sort of casually ordered 6 bacon cheeseburgers. I looked at this kid, and back then, Bleek was a thin dude, and I was like, "Word?" I'm thinking, he's trying to take advantage of me. But I went ahead and ordered them, and when they came, I sat the bag in front of Bleek and told him to get busy because I was going to make sure he ate all 6 of them. As he unwrapped the first burger, I was thinking that the stomach ache he was about to have would be a lesson number one for this little nigga. Don't take advantage of people's kindness. But Bleak wasn't paying me any mind. He hunched over those wrappers and ate every single one of those burgers and was like, "Bet, let's get to the booth." He was hungry and nervous. These little tests I gave Bleak had a direct parallel to the lyrics to the song I'd given him. It was called Coming of Age. And the key line is when my character in the song offers Bleak $1,000 to ride around the hood. He replies, "A G? I ride with you for free. I want the long term riches." He passes the test by showing that he's down to learn and is already thinking about the bigger picture rather than coming for a handout. And even if I die, he's in my will somewhere. For my third album, I decided to come back to the story of 2 characters from Coming of Age. By the time we get to Coming of Age, the sequel, the dynamic is a little different. This kid you recruited to be a member of your team now wants to be the star player. He's got a little crew of his own, and people are telling him he should be the boss, that he should take you out. The first verses of the song, when so much of the action happens, are all written as internal thoughts. The words we're rapping are unspoken. It's a conversation that's happening in the 2 characters' heads. But that's real life. The person that betrays you won't yell out his plans to turn on you, but he might think them so loud you can practically hear it. I've seen this kind of thing happen in the streets a million times. People set brothers against each other by feeding poison to the less experienced one. But it happens all over, not just in the streets. In fact, the inspiration of coming back to the coming of age story was what was happening with Bleak in real life. Just like the character in the song, after the original song, Bleak got a little fame in the hood. He built up a following of chicks in Marcy and started feeling himself, which is understandable. But then it came time to record the next album. I made plans to meet Bleak at the studio to work on some new material and he didn't show. I called his house and his mom's told me he wasn't feeling well. Now, this was the same kid who ate 6 bacon cheeseburgers without blinking. I wasn't buying it. So I broke down to the projects and knocked on his door. His mom's cracked it open. Hey, Val, what's up? Where's Bleek? She just pointed to the back of the apartment and told me, go get him. I knocked on his bedroom door and he was in there with some chick. And that was it for me. I told him, look, you want to be here? Be here. And I left. He called later about the tour and I told him, what tour? He asked about the new album and I was like, what new album? I cut him off. He'd forgotten why I put him on in the first place. I loved his hunger, but he got full real quick. Bleek was still just a kid and took the lesson like a man. And when it came time for album number 3, he was back. And after that, he launched his own career. Today, he's running his own label and still touring with me. I can't even count the times over the years niggas have tried to bait Bleek into a battle with me about his position. They don't see the respect I have for him or the strength of character it takes for him to play a supporting role while he's also trying to build his own thing. Bleek has turned out to be one of the most secure guys I've met or done business with, which is ironic given that he started off being the youngest. When people say hustling is easy money, they couldn't be more wrong. Paranoia and fear warn their way into every interaction you have. When somebody says hi to you, you can't just say hi back and keep it moving. You have to watch the person's body language, silently speculate about their intent. Was it too enthusiastic and artificial? Was it reticent? A way of pulling away? Most important, is he working with the cops? It can wear you down. The second coming of age song is meant to reflect the constant internal cycling that's never spoken and the intense way we analyze each other, with even slight body language serving as a life or death clue. It's also meant to capture the power of brotherhood. They say that soldiers in armies don't fight for the cause, they fight for each other. And that's the same motivation for a lot of kids in the street. Of course, just like in a war, older guys use that kind of loyalty as a way to exploit the kids working for them. But I wanted to show how easily young guys are drawn into that life and into danger, from the almost pathetic eagerness to become a hood star in the first song to the weed and peer pressure ambition of the second. It's easy to get in and to get deeper and deeper, but it's like the lyric says, till death do us part. In the end, it's a song about mutual loyalty, a rare thing in the streets, and just as rare off of them.